What happened within NXIVM was what happens with a lot of totalitarian cults. Raniere, he sexually exploited women in the group, and then this escalated until in the end, he created a kind of secret society, a cult within a cult, that were sex slaves. And these women would be branded with a cauterizing iron. And it was that was finally the tipping point.
We're getting ready to dive into NXIVM, which I know you had a big part in, not in the cult, but deprogramming and getting involved with some court stuff. So could you go into that a little bit?
Well, this all started in around 2001, 2002. And I was approached by a family in New Jersey that their son and two daughters were involved in NXIVM. And I had never heard of it. Actually, at that point, it was called Executive Success Programs, or ESP, and the people involved were called espions. And they followed a guy named Keith Raniere, who at one point had been an Amway distributor, and then he created a big MLM, multi-level marketing company called Consumer Byline, which was sued out of existence by attorney generals in different states. And then after that folded, he created ESP, Executive Success Programs, which evolved into NXIVM. And that was a seminar selling company that basically marketed courses, very expensive, that people would attend for self-improvement. And Raniere had what he called a philosophy that he taught through NXIVM, which was called rational inquiry. And really what I came to find out was that NXIVM was actually an amalgam of things that Raniere had copied, largely from Scientology. He copied much of what they teach. And then he also incorporated kind of the structure of another organization called Landmark Education, formerly known as EST, Erhard Seminars Training, their kind of training structure. And then he also fancied Ayn Rand, the author of, Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead, and he incorporated many of her beliefs regarding objectivism into his philosophy. And then he created multi-level marketing for his trainers, his coaches, that he adapted from his experience with Amway and his previous failed MLM. And this family came to me and they said, our daughters are involved in this, our son-in-law is involved. Will you please help us? And so I examined, I investigated, and I realized that NXIVM was really a large group awareness training company, and that the kind of training that they offered was very extreme, and I would say indicative of a thought reform program and coercive persuasion as opposed to anything really educational. And that is that the ultimate goal, in my opinion, that NXIVM had was to create people who would be deployable agents for NXIVM, that they would do whatever Keith Raniere wanted, give him all their money, work long hours for very little compensation. It was all about just serving Keith Raniere and his co-founder, Nancy Salzman. They actually would call Raniere Vanguard. That was his title. And every year there would be what was called Vanguard Week, which would be the celebration of his birthday. People would bring him gifts, praise him. And Nancy Salzman was called Prefect. So they ruled over this community, which eventually would include thousands of people in the United States and Canada, in Mexico. There would be celebrities that would become involved. The actress Allison Mack from the television series Smallville. For a period of time, Catherine Oxenberg, who starred in Dynasty, the television series from the 80s. She was involved, and her then husband, Casper Van Diem, and their daughter also was involved. So this became a very large operation, and in particular, two heirs to the Seagram's liquor fortune, Sarah and Claire Bronfman, became involved. And they control hundreds of millions of dollars. And it has been reported that Ranieri got approximately $100 million from the Bronfmans that was then used by him at his behest for whatever he wanted. So this went on for a number of years, and I did interventions for this family in New Jersey, getting 3 of their family members out, but one son would remain, and much to their sorrow. I think he stayed in until almost the bitter end when Keith Raniere was arrested. And what happened within NXIVM was what happens with a lot of totalitarian cults where the leader has no accountability. Raniere, like many of the cult leaders I've dealt with, in my opinion, he would fit, and many people have described him, mental health professionals, as a psychopath or a malignant narcissist. So this kind of individual just gets worse, especially in a cult environment where everyone is agreeing with him constantly and there are no checks or balances. So his behavior became more and more outrageous. He sexually exploited women in the group. And then this escalated until in the end, he created a kind of secret society, a cult within a cult that were sex slaves. And these sex slaves. And these women would be branded with a cauterizing iron, with no anesthetic, and in their pelvis would be engraved what later was understood to be his initials. And it was that was finally the tipping point.
How many women were part of that? How many women are out there with his initials branded on them?
The women that were branded, I'm not sure exactly how many. I think it's safe to say that there were a number of women that were branded. One would eventually, Sarah Edmondson, would allow the brand to be photographed, and it was on the front page of the New York Times. And that was the beginning of the end for Keith Raniere, who was eventually arrested for sex trafficking, racketeering, fraud, and also he was found to be in possession of child pornography. And so it was a horrible, horrible cult, but it was a process of years that this went on. And I was a witness to the escalating destructive behavior of Raniere, and how no matter how much money he had, no matter how much power he acquired, he wanted more and more and more. And it was about humiliating women, having control over women, and just plundering money from his followers.
Back to the cult within a cult, the sex slaves. So are these actual sex slaves, or are they voluntary?
What Keith Raniere would do, very similar to Scientology, is he would get information on people through the process of them being in NXIVM and confessing and emptying themselves to coaches that were over them. And this would become what he called collateral, in which he could threaten them, intimidate them, and say, I know your secrets. If you don't cooperate, if you don't submit, I will use it against you. And
I mean, what kind of secrets are we talking about here?
There would be compromising photographs, admissions to possible, things that someone had done that were embarrassing, that were humiliating, things about their personal life, their business, whatever. Keith Raniere would gather this information, and it would become his file on these individuals. Now, it's important.
These people are so trusting that they're...
Shawn, you need to understand that this was a long process.
Okay.
That these women were in NXIVM for years. That India Oxenberg, who I met, Catherine Oxenberg's daughter, and I would work with Catherine Oxenberg to get India out of NXIVM. She was in NXIVM for years. She was like 18, 19 years old. And she was growing up as a young woman in NXIVM and isolated. Eventually, when Catherine and her then husband, Casper Van Diem, left NXIVM because they thought it was strange, that there was something wrong, and they left. And she wanted India out, and she struggled to get India out. And Keith Raniere would not let her out. And India would be one of the women who would be branded through this process in this group that was a cult within the cult. And the women were told that this was a women's empowerment group and that there were women over women, and they did not realize that the ultimate authority was Keith Raniere and that he was at the top of the pyramid, lurking, running everything. In fact, when women were branded, they were often videotaped. I mean, this was like sadistic. So there was a woman who was a member of NXIVM that was a doctor, a medical doctor. She's since had her medical license revoked by the state of New York. But she would take the cauterizing iron and create the brand to a woman who was strapped to a gurney. It would take as long as 30 minutes or more. That would be incredibly painful, but this would be endured as a sign of, empowerment, supposedly. But in reality, Raniere would watch this. And in my opinion, he was the ultimate misogynist, wanting to humiliate, degrade women, control women. And he did this, and this went on unknown for a period of time.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.